Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. March of 2017, AMD launched the Ryzen 7 series of CPUs and forever changed the computing landscape. We moved from 4 cores and 8 threads being the industry standard for a long time, like 10 years, to 8 cores, 16 threads being the new high-performance standard. It took Intel a little bit of time, but we now have the i9-9900K, 8 cores, 16 threads, 5 GHz clock speed. It is the fastest CPU in the world for consumer desktop platforms. Now, Ryzen's amazing. Intel's better, but you're going to pay for it. It's expensive. In today's video, I'm going to talk about their differences a little bit. I'm mostly going to talk about the Intel side of things because this is the first video in a series on the $3,000 i9-9900K Platinum build. This is the premium machine for those who frankly have all the money in the world. Today's video is sponsored by Skillshare, the online learning platform with over 25,000 classes, less than $10 a month, unlimited access, but the first 500 people to click the link in the video description below get 2 free months of unlimited access to all of these classes absolutely for free. If you're going to be building a computer like this i9-9900K, then you might want to do some content creation. This is an example of a premium masterclass on Adobe Premiere Pro video editing. You can see here there are multiple lessons. There are notes that you can go over. There are 48 reviews of this class, and the teacher, Phil Ebener, has 36,000 followers here on Skillshare, and you can see he has multiple courses. This gives you an idea of whether or not a specific actual instructor is worth following. You can see some of these have thousands of students. Many of these courses are up to 10 hours long, broken up into bite-sized chunks. For under $10 a month, this is a phenomenal value for the money. There are going to be 2 machines linked in the video description below. One I'm about to discuss right here, which actually totals about $3,200. $3,000 for the title and thumbnail is a nice round number, but the reality is this is a $3,200 build. I will have a second build down there that is half this price, based on the Ryzen 7 2700 CPU, a more modest motherboard, a more modest case, a slightly reduced graphics card, but not by much, RTX 2080 instead of a 2080 Ti, still epic performance for half the money. You could buy 2 of them for the price of one of these. The point of this computer is to show you what you can do if you've got the budget to build the best. And the best this is. We're going to talk about the differences between the CPUs and the platform benefits of Intel beyond just performance. If all you think the difference between these chips is performance, stick around. I got some surprises for you. There are more differences than just how many frames per second these chips will give you. Let me say just right up front, if your goal is to play any game at high frame rates, to live stream any game at high frame rates, if your goal is to do content creation, 3D animation, video editing, any type of heavy demanding work, and you don't, for whatever reason, want to go to a high-end desktop, and we'll talk about that as well, then this is definitely the CPU that you want. Not only does it have the 8-core 16 threads, but it has the higher clock speed and the higher per-core performance, and so you'll have a snappier overall experience and the best frame rates, especially if you have a 144 Hz or a 240 Hz monitor and you want to get the most out of it in the most demanding games. Frankly, it's Intel or bust. Ryzen's awesome, but it starts to peter out when you get to those high frame rates, and that's one of the main performance benefits of Intel. This is an update of my last Cadillac build, which was the i7 8700K. That was a $2,000 machine. We've upped the budget by 50%. Part of the reason for that is the motherboards have gotten more expensive. The CPU definitely got a lot more expensive. And just overall, we've increased the budget because when we did the last build, Ryzen 2nd Gen was out and the parts were sort of rough on the first generation. It's gotten better. So if you're going to go Intel, go all the way. In other words, if you're going to do it right. But as I said, most people don't need this. It's luxury, not required. This first video is mostly about the CPU itself and the platform that it's installed on and the benefits it provides to you. The detailed parts overview, the why vlog of why I pick out the parts, alternatives, etc., that's going to be in a second video because frankly, I already know how long this is going to be. It's going to be way too long and many people are not going to watch it. This video is part one of a series linked in the video description below for the whole playlist. This is going to be the why Intel and why the Z series platform. What are the benefits of this compared to Ryzen? What does it bring you beyond just frame rate? And sort of a generalized discussion of the computer and why you might consider this over high-end desktop platforms, Threadripper or Skylake X or now Cascade Lake. What it's not going to be is a detailed parts overview of every single part in the build. Otherwise, the video would be too long. That's going to be in part two. And if you're more interested in seeing why I picked this liquid cooler and what else you might choose, why this motherboard is here and what else you might choose, you want to click in the playlist down below and go to part two, where I'm just going to talk about the parts in detail and we're not going to discuss Ryzen at all. This is the video where we do the comparison and we talk about the platform benefits. Then we're going to have a build video and then benchmarks. When Zen 2 launches, rest assured, I will compare the performance of the i9, the Ryzen 7 2700X, and then Zen 2 once it comes out. We're a couple weeks away from that, but those will be coming, not to worry. Many people, when they talk about the i9, want to talk about performance. Well, it's faster than Ryzen, right? It is, but we're not going to talk about performance at the moment. I've already done benchmarks between the two. I will do updated benchmarks because Windows and games and everything gets updated, but that's not really what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is the platform, more specifically PCI-Express lanes. Ryzen has 16 PCI-Express lanes to the graphics card, 4 for an NVMe drive, and then of course it has the chipset with a link to it. The Intel CPU has 16 PCI-Express lanes to the graphics card and 24 platform lanes off the chipset with a DMI 3.0 link from the chipset to the CPU. What this means is that you can install more devices on Intel than you can Ryzen. I'll give you a simple example. This motherboard has 3 M.2 slots on it. You can put 3 NVMe X4 drives on each of those slots and they will all run at 4x speed, although not at the same time because of the DMI link between the CPU and chipset. But individually, they all have full access to 4 lanes each, and they do not take anything away from the graphics card. You cannot install 3 NVMe drives on Ryzen. There are a number of boards that allow the installation of 2 NVMe drives. However, most boards give the first drive 4 lanes and the second drive 2 through the chipset. It runs at a much slower speed. There are a couple of boards that get around this. My recent Ryzen 7 2700X build does. Asus ROG Crosshair 7 Hero has 2 full-speed X4 M.2 slots on it. How does it do this, you ask? It robs the lanes from the graphics card. When you install 2 NVMe drives in that motherboard, the graphics card runs at 8 lanes, not 16, and there is no way around it. There aren't enough PCI-Express lanes on the Ryzen platform, but there are on Intel. In fact, you can not only run a graphics card at 16 lanes and 3 M.2 drives at 4 lanes each, you can still have other devices on the board. You've got your networking and USB and everything else is running. It is all running through the chipset to be sure, and if everything tries to run simultaneously, the bottleneck then becomes the DMI 3 link between the chipset and the CPU. But if you're not trying to do everything at once, then every individual device has full speed, and they simply take turns. That's not even an option. So from the point of view of having a premium build, and we will have 3 NVMe drives on here, Intel does have the superior platform. If you have need of having all 3 NVMe drives running at the same time, that's what the high-end desktop platforms are for, with the additional PCI-Express lanes direct to the CPU, either Intel's high-end desktop on X299 or Threadripper X399. The next awesome feature of Intel is it has integrated graphics. Swell, right? I know, you're all laughing right now and thinking this is absurd and ridiculous. Who in the world builds such a computer and uses integrated graphics? You'd be surprised. Now, we're not going to be using those integrated graphics to drive any displays. The displays, of course, will be connected to our super premium graphics card you see over here, but even if you go with a different graphics card, you're almost certainly putting some graphics card into this machine. So who cares about integrated graphics? A little thing called QuickSync. If you are live streaming on Twitch, yes, both NVIDIA and AMD cards have hardware-accelerated encoders to allow you to encode your video and send it to Twitch. And they do not, and that same is true of Mixer and YouTube and everything else. It does not use a lot of performance from the card, but it does use some. The benefit to the QuickSync is that it does not use your graphics card at all. You can be live streaming to Twitch or Mixer or YouTube or anything else, and you use 0% of your graphics card for maximum performance while using the integrated graphics just for video transcoding to upload. You can take this a step further, and this is something I've actually tested on the last generation machine, the i7-8700K, the previous Cadillac build. I was live streaming World of Warships. Not an overly demanding game to be sure, but I was using the NVIDIA encoder to live stream to Twitch, and then in the background, I was using Adobe Premiere Pro, or rather Adobe Media Encoder, because I use that for my background encodes. I had a previous live stream that I had clipped some stuff out of that I was doing an encode. I mostly did this for a test. I have second machines I can do that on, but I was able to play the game at full performance and live stream to Twitch using the NVIDIA encoder and have Adobe Media Encoder encoding in the background using the QuickSync on the integrated graphics, and everything ran smoothly and perfectly. It was remarkable how well it worked. Now that machine has 32 gigs of RAM in it. It wasn't originally spec'd that way, so if you watch the original video and go, you did that in 16? No, that machine got upgraded to 32 gigs the minute I was done building it. This machine is getting 32 gigs from day one. RAM prices have come down. There's no excuse to build a machine like this and not put 32 gigs in it. In fact, yeah, 64 is probably overkill for this, but the prices are getting interesting. They're not as bad as they used to be, but 32 gigs is really where it should be at, so you can absolutely do that. Now, when you watch this, you may be saying, I don't care about that. I'm not live streaming, or I'll just use the NVIDIA encoder. It's fine. Fair enough. But Ryzen does not have any integrated graphics at all. What if you need to take out your graphics card, or maybe you're swapping cards? This at least has graphics on board. Ryzen doesn't even have the choice. Intel software optimizations. This is sort of a nebulous topic because you can't just point to one benchmark or one test and say, see, it's faster here or faster there. Generally, older software is going to show a larger difference on Intel than it will on Ryzen. A good example is some older games like Grand Theft Auto 5, for example, runs notably better on Intel than it does on Ryzen. It came out long before Ryzen existed. More recent games, Shadow of the Tomb Raider for example, run extremely well on Ryzen. And many programs are slowly being updated. Adobe Premiere Pro is a really good example. When Ryzen launched, the performance was terrible. It really was very uneven, and while I switched to Ryzen when it came out, I was coming off a 6-core Broadwell E at the time, it was a very uneven experience. It has improved tremendously in the past 2 years, and this statement will become less and less true as time goes on. However, there are still programs that simply love high single-core clock speed. The fact of the matter is 5 gigahertz of Intel clock speed is superior in all respects to 4.2-ish gigahertz of Ryzen clock speed. It just is faster. How much faster depends upon your program. But if you want to be fast 100% of the time, we're not quite there yet where everything is Ryzen optimized and everything is fast on Intel, whereas Ryzen can be hit or miss depending upon what you're doing. I am not disparaging Ryzen with these statements. I'm just stating the fact that Intel has had a very long time to have everything optimized for it, and Ryzen is the relative new kid on the block. It's getting better, but it's not quite there yet. Soon, next 2 years, I think this won't be an issue anymore, but for the moment, it's still a give or take. That brings us to performance, the one reason probably a lot of people do want to buy an i9. The fact of the matter is the i9-9900K is straight up faster in all respects than the Ryzen 7 2700X. How much faster depends upon what you're doing, between 20 to 40% on average. 30% is probably a safe number to go with. A good example is the Blender benchmark is 27% faster between i9 and Ryzen 7 2700X. Some older games are definitely going to be in the 40% range. Some newer games, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, actually, when it launched, was a lot slower on Ryzen, but they fixed that in patches. The difference is closer to 20% now. You're going to find a lot of newer games are going to be closer to 20%. You may very well be saying, well, Ryzen's fast enough, right? It plays my games and runs my programs fast enough. Yes, it does. In fact, if you have a 120 Hz or slower monitor, you may not notice a serious difference between these two because Ryzen is good these days with software optimizations up to about 120 frames per second in most modern games. Want 144 frames per second? Want 144 frames per second the majority of the time? It's still Intel. If you have a 144 Hz monitor, you really want an Intel CPU. I love Ryzen, it's great, but it really struggles to hold 144 frames per second in a majority of titles. There are exceptions, but in a majority of titles, it's going to struggle. If you have a 200 or 240 Hz monitor, why are we even having this conversation? It's Intel, Intel, and some more Intel if you've got that kind of monitor. But if you've got a 60 Hz monitor, why would you buy Intel? It's expensive. Buy Ryzen unless you want one of the other benefits I mentioned before. But if you've got a 60 Hz monitor, most of you, like 98% of you, should be on Ryzen. Now, I keep mentioning the 2700X. Currently, the 2700 non-X chip is actually the deal. Now, we're not going to talk about Ryzen too much here, but on average, you're going to pay about $80 less for the non-X version. You won't notice the difference unless you're staring at benchmark charts all day. If you're just using your computer, if I put a 2700 next to a 2700X with the stock coolers and a decent motherboard and 16 gigs of RAM, and I didn't tell you which was which and just had you play some games with no frame rate numbers on the screen, I doubt very many of you would be able to tell the difference. Buy the 2700. It's got a very good silent cooler. It's a great value for the money. It's hovering right around $200 at the moment, and they're including 2 free games with it, which Intel's not doing. So that's the deal over on that side, and that's what the $1,600 PC link down in the video description is based on, because it's the true value for the money. I make no claims here. No claims that Intel is somehow the value here or the deal, or somehow it's a superior price to performance ratio than Ryzen. Of course not, that's ridiculous. It is, however, the best. If you think about it for a minute, that's an interesting statement. The best. If you go to cars, vacations, Rolex watches, which I don't wear a watch or have a Rolex, but if you did, if you go to the best in any of those categories, you'll pay a veritable fortune. How much does the best vacation cost? How much does first class travel cost? How much does a Lexus or a Mercedes-Benz or a Ferrari cost? How much does a Rolex cost? They cost 10, 20, 30 times what value for the money does. Take watches. You can, for $200 to $500, buy an extremely nice premium Seiko or Citizen or other premium watch with real gold on it and even a few diamonds on it at a very reasonable price. A Rolex could easily cost you $20,000 to $40,000. The difference, of course, is it's a mechanical Swiss design movement, and they're very nice and they're collectible, and they do hold their value over time to a point. But nobody buys those for timepieces. Not really. They're a statement of luxury, and they are expensive. This is the best for a $300 price premium over a Ryzen 7 2700. Think about that for a minute. For $300, you get the best. You get the best performance, the most optimizations, the fastest possible frame rates, the most PCI-Express lanes, the most NVMe drives. You get the best for a couple $100. If you're building a $1,000, $1,200, even $1,600 computer, as I've linked in the description below, who cares? There's enough compromises in those machines. You should not buy Intel. You should absolutely be on Ryzen. But if you've got over $2,000 to spend, anything over $2,000, this should be on your shopping list, because the additional cost to go Intel at that point is an ever smaller percentage of your total budget. If you're going 32 gigs of RAM, if you're going a big cooler or a big fancy glass case, if you're going to an RTX 2080 Ti, get the best. If you're going middle of the road, get the best deal. I really can't put it any simpler than that. It really just comes down to what your budget is and whether you want the best deal or the best. A quick note of history for those of you who think Intel has always been expensive and AMD has always been cheap. Yeah, most of the time, because most of the time Intel's had the fastest CPU in the world. For a brief period of time, 19 years ago, this was not true.
AMD's Athlon was first to 1 gigahertz. They beat Intel's Pentium 3 there. And AMD charged out the nose for it. The launch price of the AMD Athlon 1 gigahertz CPU was $1,299. When AMD had the fastest CPU in the world, they were the most expensive CPU in the world. And even during the Pentium 4 era, when the Pentiums were the best, they weren't by much and they ran really hot, Athlons that were performance competitive with them were not cheap. They did start to come down over time when faster and faster Intel CPUs came out, and then once the Core 2 quads came out, there was no competition. The Conroe chips just ran off with performance. Speaking of which, the launch price of a Q6600, the first Core 2 quad at 2.4 gigahertz, was $850 some odd dollars. It didn't stay there very long, but Intel was charging nearly $1,000 12 years ago actually, for their Core 2 quad CPU. $500 for the i9, in relative perspective to those chips, is really, really cheap. If Ryzen didn't exist, of course. If you really want some heartache, go back even further to 1991. Intel was charging in 2019 dollars for a 486 DX33 $2,000. That's in today's money, but $2,000 for a 486 DX33. My, how times have changed. One thing that I think is worth repeating, I said at the beginning of the video, I will say it again. But Zen 2! Yes, I know, I'm recording this in May 2019. We are a couple of weeks away from the announcement at Computex from AMD CEO Lisa Su about Zen 2. Will we get specific launch dates? Will we get specific clock speeds and core counts? I don't know. I suspect that we will. I think we're due for it, and I think that we will. I don't know that the CPU is going to launch at that time. I'm expecting a launch in the latter half of June 2019. So we might be about 6 weeks away from the actual product availability street date. However, 6 weeks is not that long. If you're watching this in May, and your question, you're staring at the screen, and you're about to go to the comment section and feverishly start typing, but Zen 2, hold on. If you can wait 6 weeks, by all means wait 6 weeks. I am not making this video to encourage anybody to skip the Zen 2 announcement and quickly go buy one of these right today because they might go away. They're not. It's fine. If you can wait 6 weeks, wait 6 weeks. Maybe we'll see a price drop. Maybe Zen 2 will be more competitive. I'm looking forward to benchmarking it. We will see. If you need to buy today, or your specific software needs are Intel, or you just don't want to worry about it, Intel exists. As far as pricing and availability and performance, nobody who is authorized to speak on the subject will talk about it, so everything is just rumors and guesses right now. There have been no official announcements, but we will cover the live streams. And in fact, watch us on the 27th and 28th because my wife Rogue and I, we will be covering the AMD announcements at Computex as well as the Intel announcements. We'll be doing several live streams during Computex. So come join us. We will watch them together and then we'll talk about them and give you our thoughts and opinions. Overall, as premium as this is, I would like to point out that if you've got the money, this computer, for a lot of money, will provide you with many, many years of excellent performance. 5+ years, frankly, this motherboard and this CPU should last you. If you are a super premium graphics card user, you might end up with one graphics card upgrade during that 5-year period, but you're going to have an awesome PC computing experience. One question I would like to directly answer, and I did this in the 2700X build guide as well, would I build this for myself? Would I build this computer as you see here? Yes, I would. I would make a few minor changes if it was being built for me personally, although it is being built for me personally. I will use this as a replacement for my 8700K. When I asked that question on the 2700X build, the answer was no. It was the budget for that was too expensive. I talked about that in that video. Having used both Ryzen and Intel, there is a very important thing that doesn't show up in benchmarks that does show up in day-to-day actual use. And that is the experience of just using the machines, running Windows, running multiple programs, task switching, recording things, update, drive performance. It doesn't show up in most benchmarks, and it's very, very hard to demonstrate in a video. You're just sitting there watching a video. How do I show you The intrinsic differences, beyond charts, of using this CPU versus that CPU. I own a lot of Ryzen computers. I like Ryzen. It is wonderful value for the money. Show of hands, how many of you think we would have gotten this CPU from Intel at this price point if Ryzen didn't exist? Anybody? No, of course not. Don't be ridiculous. There's no way in the world Intel would have done this. But they did, and it is the better option. I have a number of Ryzen 7 computers, but my Twitch streaming PC has always been an Intel. It was an i7-4790K, and then it moved to the i7-8700K. My main Twitch streaming PC, which I streamed for a year and a half, was never a Ryzen machine. I did briefly do a couple streams just for benchmarking purposes on Ryzen, but I've never used one that way on a normal basis. Why? Because Intel's superior. You can see it and feel it when you're in front of the machine, and it doesn't show up in videos. It is the better experience if you have the money. If you're on a budget, if you've only got $1,000, $1,200, $1,500, yes, Ryzen is the way to go. But the minute you pass that $2,000 mark, buy an Intel CPU. It's a better experience. I cannot show you in a chart why it's a better experience, but I would put my own money into it knowing what I know today because everything is just a little bit nicer. Let me give you an analogy. Take two people. One person has had air conditioning all his life, and the other person has never had air conditioning and has never experienced air conditioning. The guy with air conditioning explains the virtues of it and how wonderful it is, and the room is always a nice temperature, and there's never any hot drafts or cold drafts, and he never has to worry about what it is outside. Everything is just peachy. The person without air conditioning has adapted and is completely used to the experience of fans and ventilation and drinking lots of water and taking siestas in the middle of the day, and he doesn't understand why this guy over here is trying to tell him to spend all this money because he has gotten through the first 20 or 30 years of his life just fine without that newfangled contraption. I would like a show of hands in the audience. How many of you would give up air conditioning if you have it? Anybody? Nobody? I didn't think so. Once your body has become accustomed to it, once you're used to it, it's a glaring hole if it's not there. That might sound extreme to some of you, but it's kind of like that with these two CPUs. Ryzen's great until you use one of these. And the minute you use one of these, actually use one. Going back to AMD, it's all just feels a little bit, it's not there. It's fine, you won't die, and not having air conditioning generally won't kill you once you adapt to it either, but you wouldn't voluntarily give it up. I have lived with Intel for a very long time. I am not going to switch from an i7-8700K to a Ryzen anything because having used them, I prefer the superior experience. And fortunately, I'm blessed having a YouTube channel to be able to have all this fancy stuff, so it's easier for me to say that. Having said that, I've been using Intel since the days of the Core 2 Duo. I did have AMD Athlons. The Pentium 4 era was different. And in the Pentium 4 era, I felt differently. The Athlons were wonderful. The Athlon XPs were wonderful. But once Core 2 came out, once Conroe came out, there really hasn't been any competition since, at least until Ryzen came along. Great CPU, just not quite Intel. But for most people, the better value. Thank you all so much for watching this long, rambling conversation on i9 and a little bit on Ryzen. Let me know your thoughts below. I don't respond to every comment that's down there, but I promise you I do read them. Leave your comments down in the comment section below. I will be very interested to hear what everybody thinks about this. Like this video if you like it. Share it with your friends if you love it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with the big, huge red button directly below. Questions, comments, thoughts, feedback, suggestions? Well, I already said that part. Links in the video description below to the playlist on this video series. I will also link to the Ryzen 7 2700X playlist. And as I said, this build and then the Ryzen 7 2700 build for $1,600 will be down in the video description below. That's a better value for most people. It just isn't the super premium Cadillac Platinum build experience that this super beast is. Thank you all so much for watching. I will see you next time.